Well, everybody, welcome back to Tuxes Tomahawks. I'm Adam Dorito, and today I have the pleasure of speaking to Mr. Joel White. Thanks for hanging on last week since I was gone. I was in Normandy, France, jumping out of planes and hanging out with some World War II vets, and Joel had to push himself off a week until I got back into the same country. So thanks again for coming on the show, Joel. I'm really excited about our conversation today.
It's my pleasure and happy to accommodate trips to Normandy.
Yeah, no, wild place if anyone hasn't been there. And as a paratrooper, it was a really cool trip to go on as an Army, paratrooper going out there and getting to actually meet some of the guys who are still alive, because we only got a few more years left and they won't be around anymore. But definitely really sobering experience. And so Joel and I got connected through Baker from Black Rifle. And Joel is apparently the most evil man in the world, and a lot of Americans don't understand, the concept of what big pharma is. And what I really wanted to bring him on the show was I love giving people long-form discussions about this because there was this giant narrative throughout the last election cycle, especially with Making America Healthy Again and RFK's initiatives of, capping prices on prescription drugs and big pharmaceuticals, especially after the whole COVID stuff. What better guy to bring into the podcast than someone who actually is a professional lobbyist going down there and actually advocating for these bills, advocating for American innovation, and actually getting down to the root cause of what it actually means for all this stuff? Because I don't think many Americans understand that. So Joel, tell everyone a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you came from, and how you ended up getting involved in all the progressive movements that you do now in DC.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me. I saw a story about a 101-year-old vet who was in Normandy last week. Maybe you got to meet him, but have a history in my family. Both my two uncles and my dad all served in the Army. My son is a second lieutenant currently and serving. So have tons of respect.
Is he in the Army too?
He is. Yeah.
Where's he stationed at?
He's out of Springfield, Virginia. National Guard, second lieutenant, first.
Oh, very cool.
Division. Yeah,
very cool.
So, anyway, and he's loving it. He's 23 and just like light armor and just having a blast.
Well, it's actually fun to be in the military now since we actually have a president who supports the military. Because I've been in for 15 years, and man, that last administration was a complete disaster. So,
yeah, he's been in Guard for a couple of years now, and says it's like night and day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And we're just 6 months in. So change happens fast. Leadership is important. And so my background, I grew up in a small rural town in Connecticut. We had a sawmill, a quarry, and my grandfather started an ice cream shop. So I grew up making ice cream and learned what manufacturing was all about and how hard it is, and getting up at 5 a.m. and going to bed at midnight. And but wanted to come to DC, and my mom was a nurse and was always drawn into healthcare. And so started working in the healthcare field in Washington, DC, ended up working in Congress for 12 years as professional staff and wrote 9 laws, mostly in the Medicare space, and ended up working on the law that created a prescription drug benefit in Medicare. So now 68 million people, our fellow Americans, have access to prescription drugs in Medicare. It didn't used to cover drugs. So that's a huge part of how we get and stay healthy. And so I've spent the last 20 years of my life making sure that they can have access to drugs that keep them out of the hospital, that manage their diabetes, that address heart disease, all that stuff. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I also do a lot in substance use disorder, run a number of recovery groups, and also I'm a solid Christian and run a nonprofit organization. We serve about 40,000 people a year, food, rent, um, life skills, and after school programs for disadvantaged kids, stuff like that. So keep busy with my three kids and all those other things.
No, and that's really good because I'm involved in the lobbying industry too a little bit. I do a lot of veteran advocacy issues, and I will tell you, it's been 7 years and I still can't get my first bill passed. You know, because you're working with some of the most corrupt people I've ever had to deal with in my life. Like it's absolutely insane. That's on both sides of the aisle. It's not just like this. It's either Republicans or Democrats or Libertarians or whatever it is, right? But so the fact that you've actually done the work, you know what DC is like. You know how hard it is, you know, advocating for Americans because people have this misconception. It's like, oh my God, there's 300, whatever, 40 million Americans. And there's like, you know, there's the swamp in DC. But like what it actually comes down to is having those face-to-face conversation with the staffers, you know, integrating it to the bills, understanding how the system works. And it's quite complicated. But the fact that you've been able to pass so many laws says a lot about you because it's not an easy road to travel down for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's good eggs and bad eggs, just like any business or our culture. There's people here for the right reason. They care a lot about our country. They want to serve, and there's others who are not like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. So let's go kind of like right into maybe your experience during like the opioid crisis and everything. So like there was a lot going on during the opioid crisis, you know, with Afghanistan and everything else. You know, Americans had this giant prescription drug addiction problem. A lot of Americans died, and there's been this big push, especially with this administration, to reduce fentanyl, opioid overdoses, you know, Narcan, all these other things. What was your role in trying to develop some of this legislation around some of those medications and leading into that? Because I think that's important to kind of lead off to where we're going to get to by the end of the podcast, which is advocating for why some parts of big pharma are actually really good for Americans and they're not really bad. So, what was your experience during that time in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, well, I was running a government affairs firm, and what we saw was a couple of different factors coming together all at once, right? Like the increased use of opioids and prescribing of opioids really led to a lot of Americans becoming addicted to opioids. And then we kind of threw open the borders and created a funnel for fentanyl and opioids and other drugs to come across the border straight from China and other countries that killed hundreds of thousands of our fellow Americans every year, and that's still happening. The opioids death rate has gone down significantly in this year. Fentanyl seizures and deaths are roughly flat, maybe a little bit down. We're starting to get the poison off our streets, which is great. That didn't result from a law change, right? Like we closed and secured the border because we had effective leadership. Congress didn't pass a law in the last 6 months that made that happen. That was like we said, this is a key goal for the country, and we're going to do that. And so that fentanyl is still finding its way into the country. I know Customs and Border Patrol, Homeland Security, et cetera, they're doing their best to root that poison out. But one of the programs we worked on was called the Support Act. The Support Act basically stood up a number of ways for folks to get treatment for opioids and opioid addictions, but also dramatically expanded the availability of Narcan and the ability to reverse an overdose, which our first responders now effectively use to save people's lives. The challenge with that is that a lot of people will overdose, they'll get Narcan, and then they'll walk around the corner and buy more and overdose again. And so you got to address the root cause of the problem, which is someone's heart or something's happening in their life. They're covering up pain. They're trying to numb their feelings. You got to get those people into a support program or stuff like that in order to be able to prevent those overdoses and prevent that cycle. The interesting thing to me is Secretary Kennedy, who runs our health department here in Washington, will tell you he goes to a meeting every day. He was an addict. He was addicted to heroin for a long time and knows exactly where folks struggling with opioids and other addictions are coming from because he struggles with it every day. So he goes to a meeting every day.
So this is interesting because like this situation we're talking about, like this buildup probably in the last like 5, 10 years, really put a bad taste in Americans' mouth for so-called big pharma. And let's be honest, Americans are not exactly the smartest people in the world, and they believe buzzwords. They have this attention span of a squirrel. So whenever they believe in these sound bites for 20, 30 seconds, oh, big pharma's destroying this, big pharma's killing America, big pharma's doing that. But I think you and I would both agree most of medical innovation has been made by America. And if it wasn't for America, like some of the things that we're probably going to address is like we are responsible for producing some of the most innovative and revolutionary drugs, whether it comes to cancer treatment, AIDS treatment, any of those types of things. And that's not acknowledged, and that doesn't just come without a price, right? So I would love your perspective on this because I'm hesitant about it too, right? Like for me, it's like I try to go like an all natural route, or I try to avoid medications as much as possible. But sometimes when it comes down to it, you need that medication or you're gonna die.
Yeah.
Like when I came back from deployment, I had two massive surgeries, and if it wasn't for some of the medications I had to take, like it would have been a really long road for recovery. And doing Chinese feng shui and green tea powder in my nose is not going to resolve those issues, right? So what is your experience of seeing the pushback from America with this whole America make America healthy again initiative? That maybe people really didn't understand the root cause of it. And from your experience in Washington, what do you think were the root causes of that, and where are we now, and where do you see the medical industry going? Because we even had that rogue guy assassinate, the United Healthcare CEO, right? So like it turns like this big thing against anti-pharma, anti-insurance companies. But from your experience, there's got to be a lot more to that story.
Yeah, it's cultural, it's societal, it's economic, it's a lot of things. I mean, I think what I think about is we just talked about opioids, right? If you're a paratrooper, you've done hundreds of jumps, like you're going to have joint pain, you're going to have hip problems, you're going to have all kinds of things, right? Like opioids help you.
Very
And
much so.
yeah, so it's like, these things have a benefit. They weren't developed with no benefit, right? It's just sometimes they have properties that make them addictive, right? So so in the US, we are the engine of innovation in the world. We make the most innovative products. We are literally curing cancers. We are on the cusp of curing type 1 diabetes. We are curing heart disease. We are curing rare diseases. We are treating these things effectively. And for me, what I think about is if I want costs to go down, if I want to pay less and stay healthy or get healthy, that innovation is coming from drugs. It's not coming from, oh, they built a new hospital and somehow my cancer is going to be cured. I'm not going to cure Alzheimer's with a surgery or new surgical technique. Those diseases are going to be cured through pharmaceutical products. And so we want a robust, innovative industry to be able to develop those products, but we all want lower costs, right? And in America, we want free stuff. And so
Yeah, Americans always want free stuff. It kind of annoys me. Like they all think they're entitled to like everything for free because well, I'm an American, so I deserve things for free. And when I go to, I'm going to go buy my pharmaceutical drugs in Canada, or I'm going to go to Mexico and get them because they're cheaper. But like, there's a reason for that,
there
right?
is a huge reason.
Explain that reason that Americans don't understand because like I understand the gist of it, but you're the subject matter expert, and I don't want to take your thunder away. So,
well, look, I mean, if Ford wanted to give me a free F-150, I would gladly take it. My son drives one. I love them. Ford Motor Company wouldn't be in business very long if they were giving away free F-150s to every American, right? Like, so what the reason is they actually have to produce those things. They've got to do research and development, design the car. They've got to have a production line. They got to pay the workers to put those things together. They got to get raw materials and actually assemble the product. And they've got to sell it and market it and all those things. The same thing is true for drug manufacturers. Okay, they make stuff just like I made ice cream as a kid. It cost us something to get that stuff together. And what the biggest cost in drug manufacturing is, it's not making the pill. Like you hear Bernie Sanders say, it only costs you 6 cents to make this pill. Yeah, coming off the production line, the average manufacturer invests $2.5 billion to come up with one therapy. Okay. Most of the therapies they come up with that they research and develop, and that's where all the cost is, most of the cost, those things eventually don't get approved by the FDA. You got to go to the federal government and say, Mother, may I please put this product on the market for people to take in order to cure some of these diseases or treat diseases. So that all costs money, and that's the cost of the drug. Okay. And what we saw, and I'll take just a minute on this because I think it's important.
No, for sure.
In the 80s and 90s, where most of the innovation in the world was happening was in Europe. Okay. Germany, France, England were developing these creative ideas on how to treat and cure illnesses. And the bureaucrats and the politicians over there started cranking up price controls on these drugs. And so, again, use the example of Ford. Ford makes their cars here for the most part, because if they made them in Europe or they made them, somewhere else, they'd be subject probably to price controls and carbon emissions and regulations and other stuff that makes those cars much harder to make a profit on. So Europe, when they cranked up price controls on drugs, those companies came to the US. That happened in the late 90s, okay, where most of the drugs in the world were produced in Europe. 17% of the drugs were produced in the US. In the 90s, that flipped. We now produce most of the drugs in the world. Only 17% of the drugs get produced in Europe because they're using socialist price controls. So
Right.
capital goes where capital's most friendliest treated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now what we're doing in this country is everyone hates pharma. They're the boogeyman.
Yes, you are.
Because I want free stuff mostly,
Right.
but also, it's also like the insurance companies and big hospitals. Like, I'm a little guy. I feel like I'm getting ripped off, right? I pay my premiums for my health insurance and I get nickel and dimed, and the company says it's not covered. And I've got to go through a prior authorization where, they say you got to say "Mother, may I" 500 times before you can actually get the MRI or the drug or whatever.
Right.
People are viewing this as very low value. Well, what they don't realize is that the insurance company decides how much I pay for that drug. It's not the drug manufacturer. The drug manufacturer is charging a price for that product on the market, and then the insurance company marks it up by more than 40%.
And I think that's important to note because I think everyone thinks it's the pharmaceutical companies that are doing that, when in reality it's the insurance companies. Because even like my mom works in hospice, right? So she sees like the insane cost of some of these cancer treatments, or like leukemia, or lymphoma, or all these other things, right? And it's like $8,000 for like a bottle of pills, but like that's not the actual cost of the pill production. It's what the insurance company's marking it up, and that's
Yeah.
where you cause this giant dissipation of costs. Then you have, and I would love your opinion on this too, like when it comes to like Obamacare, right? Or Medicare and Medicaid, or like, for example, like, United Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Like there's such a differentiation between those things. Could you explain like maybe why that occurs, from the pharmaceutical industry's perspective?
Yeah. So I've got a product. I set a price. The manufacturer sets a price. Say it's $100. Okay. That product goes out the door. It gets covered by an insurance company. It gets trucked to the pharmacy by a distributor. And there's several other steps along the line, but like the 50% of the cost that you end up paying at the pharmacy is actually going to a middleman. Okay. So it's 50% more. The markup is 50% more. So let's start breaking that down. When it goes onto the truck that the distributor is using to get it to the pharmacy, that's about a 1% markup, 1 to 2%. Okay. That makes sense. You got to pay gas, you got to pay people, you got to get the box onto the truck, you got to unload it at the pharmacy, all that stuff. The vast majority of the cost is coming from the insurance side. And what they're doing is they're taking that markup, and what they say is they're using that money to keep your premiums low.
Interesting.
Okay? So if that's in fact true, we should have really low premiums. I don't feel like my premiums have gone down, in the recent, they've never gone down.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
But they say they're offsetting the premiums, and I think a portion of it offsets the premiums, but a portion of it goes right into the pocket. And these are very profitable companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're paying for all that stuff in between. And one of the things that Obamacare said was, you've got to cover everything. So if you're a 60-year-old postmenopausal woman, you're paying money for things like birth control
Hmm. Interesting.
or other drugs that you're never going to use. If you're a man, you're paying for hormone replacement therapy for menopause in your insurance premium. Well, I'm never going to use that product. So the thing about Obamacare was it said you had to have this big benefit package for stuff that you may never use. In Medicare, what we did was we designed a program that would force the insurers to compete against each other to drive down costs. And that worked really well until we had the Inflation Reduction Act. And what we've seen in the past 2 years with that Democrat-only bill is that premiums have increased 57%.
Yeah,
They
and
made
if
it
you could
much.
talk about, yeah, I need you to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the effects on all this, because I think it's something I am seeing a massive revolt about, especially in Colorado. Like, for example, let's just use the generic terms. Like, so people are saying illegal immigrants that are being put on Medicare and Medicaid are now causing all these costs to rise because to the normal tax-paying American, because these people don't pay taxes. So the big initiative right now is like we're going to remove all these people from the country, take them off of Medicare, Medicaid, and all these other supplementation programs that they've been given, and then we're going to be actually able to funnel those funds to actual Americans who need those benefits. And then the big accusation I see from a lot of the liberal left is that, well, now you're taking away my health care because you're cutting costs. So I don't think that's accurate necessarily. We're not cutting costs to Americans. We're cutting the costs from the people that are not Americans who are taking this money and causing these prices to arbitrarily be skyrocketed and artificially inflated across the board. And I don't understand why people can't understand that. Like, the reason why these prices are so artificially inflated because there's so many people on the program that are using it that are not Americans, that are taking the generic American taxpayer dollar and causing their prices and premiums to raise as a result, and not actually utilizing the benefit for themselves. And if I'm wrong, correct me, but that's my interpretation of what's going on.
No, that's part of the reason, right? Like, so this bill that's going through Congress right now, the one big beautiful bill,
Right.
includes changes to Medicaid and Medicare and Obamacare. And what it says for Medicaid and Obamacare is that if you're not a U.S. citizen, you can't be on this program.
What a
Okay?
concept. I
What a
can't go to
concept.
Germany. I can't just go to Germany or France like I just was and start using their stuff. Like, I actually
No,
had to have travel insurance because if I got hurt or injured when I was in France jumping out of an airplane, it would cost me like $250,000 just to get back to the U.S. Right?
and,
They're not going to cover me as an American citizen in
no,
France, so
of,
why should we cover them?
of course not. Of course not. And one of the laws, immigration laws says you can't be a public welfare burden on the U.S. Right? Like, so you're like this is just common sense. Okay, so those people would be ineligible if they're not U.S. citizens. Now, states like California have said we're going to expand our Medicaid program to non-citizens.
And that's
Okay,
what Colorado did too, and it's a disaster. We're like
and
in over $1 billion deficit because of it. Like,
and
it's
and,
insanity.
and so what the bill says is we're going to cut your the funding that's going to the state for that portion of the population, and they're going to be ineligible. The other thing the bill says is that if you are an able-bodied adult, so not someone who's disabled, blind, or has a mental health issue, or is a caretaker, or is elderly, or any of that, if you're an able-bodied adult and no kids, you have to work 20 hours a week. And if you don't work 20 hours a week, you don't get free healthcare.
I,
Okay.
I
And
think that's pretty easy to understand. I have to work to get my health care. Like,
I've got to work to get my healthcare, and this is free healthcare. There's no cost sharing on this stuff. There's no
right.
premium charged. This is generosity of taxpayers that we work and we pay taxes, and so what they're basically saying is 20 hours a week, and it's not just work. It's community service if you can't find a job, or it's go to an education program. And the goal here is we want people to be better off. We don't want people to be on Medicaid for the rest of their lives. We want them to actually earn an income, make a great income, high income, become successful, productive members of society. This is a stepping stone to do that. So we're saving money there too. Okay. And the third thing we're saying, and this is the one that gets me, is uh, some of the left will say, you're kicking about 1.5 million people off Medicaid, but those people are losing coverage because they're enrolled in 2 states. So if you're in Colorado, and if you're enrolled in Colorado, you may be getting picked up in Arizona. and you're enrolled in both states, the federal government pays both states based on your enrollment. They're saying, wait a minute, you can't live in two states. We're going to only pay one state. So the left is saying, well, that's terrible. We're going to kick all these people off Medicaid. We're not. We're just paying one state instead of two.
Right.
So Medicaid's a mess. It's been run by bureaucrats forever, and states have done a lot of schemes to draw down more taxpayer dollars. And basically what the bill is doing, and what I think the president rightly called out, is saying, we're going to clean this system up. We're not going to stand for waste, fraud, and abuse in the Medicaid program anymore.
Yeah.
And if you're not a citizen, you're not going to benefit from this.
No, I agree. And like something that's insane that I even saw what the Colorado legislature just did this last session, which I want to strangle every single one of these people in that state legislature. Like they ran out of so much money from funding illegal immigrants that they're now cutting money out of. So like we have this like public fund that is basically from like uncollected like utility bills or something like that. So like if I paid too much for my utility bill and if I don't claim it, it goes into this like general fund that earns interest or whatever until I can go back and claim it. And that's my money. That's not the government's money. But the government has to hold on to this money until it's claimed properly, right? They went in there and took a 0% interest loan against the public fund in order to fund their healthcare program because they ran out of money because they're housing and medicating illegal immigrants. And literally, as we're speaking right now, they're getting tear gas shot at them at the state capitol over the stuff, waving Mexican flags, saying they want more of that money. It's insane, like that people don't understand that this is common sense reform. Because if we don't do this, and correct me if I'm wrong, then pharmaceutical companies are going to have no choice but to have to increase the prices of what they're doing, because if they're just giving everything away for free and everything's capped at a limit that it can't be properly distributed, and then these insurance companies are constantly ripping American citizens off because of all these people that aren't American citizens and aren't taking the actual benefits the way it's intended to be used, as in it's a stepping stone, work 20 hours a week if you're able-bodied, do these things. Same thing with unemployment, right? Like unemployment's not supposed to last forever. It's supposed to be a cap to it. Get you a job program, get you involved in something so you can go back to contributing to society. But like so many of these people, and I think a lot of it happened over COVID, honestly. I mean, once COVID hit, everyone was just getting, oh, you mean the government is willing to hand out billions of dollars for me to sit on my ass and do nothing and I can just rip off the government? And now everyone wants to continue these entitlements. But I think a lot of, especially like what Massey's been saying in Congress, is like, we're just trying to get back to pre-COVID spending. And we're spending even more money now when people are trying to go back to work and they just don't want to. And they're just abusing the system and we're turning into Europe. And it's insanity to me.
This is the big problem with price controls. Okay, you say, should we have price controls on drugs? 90% of Americans would say yes. Okay. What price controls are, though, is the camel's nose under the tent to get us to more government-run healthcare. So in all government programs, Medicaid, Medicare, hospital care for poor people, there are price controls. Okay, those price controls mean that people pay very low or next to nothing or zero for drugs. Okay, now what happens? Those costs get shifted onto commercial markets, right? We as employed people working in jobs, we pay more for those drugs because you've got to have a margin and make up those costs, the $2.5 billion that you put in developing a therapy. So we pay more for that. So to more and more expansion of price controls means one of two things. We either have less innovation because industry can't make a return on their $2.5 billion investment, or people who are left in the private market are going to pay more. That is a recipe for disaster. We're basically copying Europe all over again with less innovation and more bureaucrats telling us what we can and can't access. One of the things Europe does in their price controls is they say, we're going to have very low prices for drugs. But guess what? England, Canada, Germany, France have about 50% of the products available to their patients. That means a cancer patient can't get the latest therapy. They have to wait at least 18 months to 4 years to get their therapy. That is not good healthcare. Like in America, we want free stuff, but we also want the latest technology, the best stuff, the stuff that's going to cure grandma. over cancer. We have that in the U.S. And so price controls would obliterate that.
Yeah, and this is actually a good point because if anyone wants to know what the national healthcare system is like in the UK, join the U.S. military. It's very
Mm.
similar in how bad the healthcare is because, yeah, we get free healthcare in the military, and it sucks. It is so bad. Like when I came back from deployment, I had to have two massive reconstructive surgeries, and if I didn't use my, because I was in the guard at the time, now I'm a reservist, but like if I didn't use my private healthcare back in the company that I work for here, in a major oil and gas company with great benefits, I would have had to wait 2 years to be able to walk again, basically, to have all the nerve damage replaced in my legs, right? But no, I
Yes.
came home and I was in surgery within 2 weeks, right? And I got it all fixed, right? And I had the best care possible and everything else, and it was great. I'm fully recovered now and everything's great, but I would just be now getting that surgery done now if I had waited for the VA. And in the national healthcare system in the UK and in Canada, it's even worse. I mean, they even have like whatever the Right to Die Act over there in Canada, where they're just like encouraging people to kill themselves because it's cheaper for the government for you to off yourself under the government's watchful eye than it is to get the healthcare, right? And also, I don't think people understand this either. Is that why do you think so many Canadians and people in the UK, when they have like heart surgery or cancer treatments or everything else, they come to the US for that treatment? Like they come to the US for that and they'll pay out of it because they want the treatment done now and they can't get it done in their respective countries. And people just don't want to acknowledge that reality.
They want it done here because it's the best care in the world, and they can get it. So that's not true. Every system around the world that does price controls, every single one of them, um, what we see is patients lining up for care and they can't access the latest therapies. I'll give you one example. It's called the Veterans Health Administration, government-run healthcare,
Yeah.
right? And uh, literally some of the poorest quality care that you can get, and often waiting lines.
Yep.
Can't get in to see a facility, can't get in to see a doctor, maybe can't get the latest therapy. The Veterans Health Administration uses price controls, and they specifically
Yep.
exclude drugs off their formularies, which is why it was such a major accomplishment for the Trump administration to do the choice program,
Yes.
right?
And,
Get
and
people out.
actually, so I interviewed somebody on this podcast 2 months ago. One of the best interviews ever. His name is Casey West. He was a Marine,
Hmm.
did 4 combat deployments, and got diagnosed with glioblastoma, like brain cancer.
Oh,
And he
wow.
was given 6 months to live. 6 months to live, and he couldn't get an appointment for the VA for a year. A year. Like he was gonna die. So he liquidated all his assets, sold his house, sold his truck, and then he found a really great cancer treatment doctor in Texas and was paying out of pocket for a long time. And he's been doing some alternative therapies, like he's been doing some of the combined. Some of the cancer treatment, obviously, that he needs because there's no way around it. But he was doing some hyperbaric treatment, some alternative stuff that's not necessarily acknowledged by the VA, but it actually worked. 18 months later, he's still alive, right? And now what he's asking for with the Trump administration, which I'm massively disappointed in every single Democrat and Republican representative of the state of Colorado for this, was that he was just asking, can I please get a referral from the VA to continue my treatment with this doctor that I've been seeing using the choice program? And
Hmm.
not a single representative in the state of Colorado, Republican or Democrat, would write this guy a letter to make sure he can get his treatment because it's like they just wanted him to die because he was a nuisance and he kept calling. So I got him on the podcast. And then I got like 1,000 people to call their offices, and they really got pissed off when I did that. But I don't care, right? But
Yeah.
now he went to Eli Crane, outside of the state of Colorado, got the letter, and now he's getting that supplemental funding to continue this treatment. But it shouldn't take a podcast and 10,000 people to get really pissed off for you to be able to get your socialized healthcare system at the VA to work for guys who have cancer for serving this country, right? And I
Yeah.
think what you're talking about is that we have a way of eliminating this, and big pharma is not necessarily as bad as people think it is. It's holding our representatives accountable. It's holding the VA accountable, and it's holding the insurance companies accountable to do right by the American person by getting rid of the illegal immigrants off the system, because that's what is affecting healthcare for Americans. And actually having these discussions where you're explaining the process of how these legislative things work, because yeah, it sounds nice we get everything for free, but nothing comes for free. And at the end of the day, it's going to be an additional burden on the American taxpayer moving forward if you use these price controls as much as you say they're being used, because it's not benefiting the American people to not understand that price controls aren't as effective as people think they are.
Well, but we want cheaper or free, and so I think those are good goals. But we also want innovation and manufacturing here in the U.S., right?
Right.
So I think that's what President Trump has outlined. He has suggested, look, you get a drug for $30 in Sweden and it's $300 here. That's not fair. So there are solutions that we can take that are free market, don't rely on price controls to meet the president's goals. I think the first big thing is all that stuff in the middle that I talked about, right? That 50% of every dollar spent on a drug doesn't go to the drug manufacturer; it goes to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
That cost needs to be passed through to the patient. The patient should get that discount, 50% cheaper drug, right?
So how do we eliminate that middleman factor
Yeah,
with that?
unfortunately, it's going to take an act of Congress.
What act of Congress do we need to pass, Joel, to do this?
Well, in this one big beautiful bill, there's
Right.
one provision that says the patient cost sharing can't be on the marked up price of the drug; it's got to be on the net price.
That makes
So
sense to me.
right there, you're getting a 30 to 50% discount through your Medicare plan. There was a bipartisan bill that passed the House last year that was teed up for action in December. We had the inauguration. It's coming up again later this year. That would require this discount pass through to the patient. That's really important. We need to get that done this year. The second thing we need to do is it's just like I don't know if you have an iPhone. I've got a Samsung device. You get more products on the market, you get more price competition. We've got the FDA that is operating off a 1990 model. They've got paper that they get and they review and they're looking at files, and there's literally the guy from the office walking back and forth with a stapler, right?
Yeah, it's like the DoD that still uses Linux to like launch missiles and stuff. You know what I mean?
Like
It's ridiculous.
it's like going to DMV, right? Like I've made
Oh,
an online appointment, but now I got to fill out the paper form.
yes.
And I got to have everything in triplicate and all that stuff. We can modernize the FDA and speed up approvals. If we get more products on the market, we'll have more price competition. We'll have more price discipline. That's good. That's going to drive down prices another 20%. Okay. The third thing we need to do is leverage AI. I know people
Interesting.
think AI is some magic wand, right? It's not a magic wand. It is an algorithm. It is a computer program. I think what we need to do is AI can be used in drug discovery and development. That's the $2.5 billion. That's where most of the cost is coming into these drugs. AI, if we had a big database of information that drug companies could use to train their models on, identify, I don't want to get too technical, but molecules and proteins and target genes and all other kinds of things, they can go through in 1 week what it would take a human 70 years to go through. We could identify thousands of new therapies through a data bank. And if the drug company used that data bank, they should pay taxpayers a royalty.
Yeah, that sounds
Okay?
like a good idea.
If we commercialize a product, have them pay a royalty for using that data bank, because that's the kind of research the federal government should be funding, the utility that it should provide in developing these innovative new products. We'd earn a return on that for every product that came to market. That would lower drug costs. So we can do it. And the final thing I would say is, like, because these other countries are freeloading off Americans, they use these price controls, and then we've got to do the research here and charge a higher price here. This is something President Trump has identified. We need to deploy all our trade guys overseas and say, just like NATO, where you're not picking up your share of defense spending, you're not picking up your share of research and development and innovation. And until you hit a benchmark of spending on that stuff, we're going to take trade action against you, whether that's tariffs or other non-tariff trade measures. But we're going to force you countries to actually pay your fair share.
No, and I think people have actually seen the effectiveness of the tariffs. A lot of people are opposed to Trump's tariffs. Like, oh my God, it's going to do this. It's going to raise the prices. It didn't do anything at all. And for the most part, it brought even China and Germany and France back to the negotiating table to doing basic things like on defense or steel. So why don't we just do it with medication as well? Because that's going to benefit the entire population of the world, not just certain industries.
Well, it's playing hardball with people and actually coming to the negotiating table with a threat that you're going to do something that's going to hurt their interests, that brings them to a solution that
Right.
says, oh, yeah, well, we've been freeloading on you long enough. Maybe we should actually free up our market and give you a better deal here. If you give us a better deal, our prices come down here.
So there's a lot of people like rare diseases and a lot of things that can only get treatment in the U.S. And if the innovation stops in the U.S. because of all these price controls, how can people ensure that they're going to get the treatment for these rare cancers or these rare diseases? Because the only country that's going to be able to save them is the U.S. But if there's no incentive to keep doing the research and development, then what's going to be the end result of that?
Well, I think the end result is that people are going to die. I mean, there's no way around that. I have an employee here who has 2 kids with rare diseases. We do a lot of work in the rare disease space. These are people without hope, right? They don't even know what's wrong with them. It's hard to diagnose, hard to get there's 7,000 rare diseases without treatments right now. These are really sick kids, and they often don't have a long lifespan. So
Yeah.
what we need to do is more of what China's doing. And this is going to sound really weird, but China is doing the opposite of what we're doing. Like, Europe cranked down on the price controls, the innovation came here. Now we're considering going down the same path as Europe, as China is ramping up grants and product approval that to the point where 40% of all the new cancer treatments in the world came out of China last year.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Like,
that's where innovation's going, because China's got a pro-innovation, friendly capital market perspective. So the companies are saying, look, it's bad. It may get worse in the U.S. Let's just go to China.
Yeah, and if we don't have an incentive to protect pharmaceutical companies here, then we're going to lose the competition race to something overseas, and I don't think that's what we want. Like, do we really want China innovating on the latest cancer drug? No offense, I don't trust the Chinese for shit. You know what I mean? Like, because they don't exactly have the best technology controls. I mean, when I was at the Air Force Academy, they hacked into our computer systems, and that's how they stole the plans to the F-22. And then they came out with a shittier version called the J-20, and it looks like an F-22. It kind of does what an F-22 does, but it's not an F-22, and we just shoot it out of the sky in 14 seconds. Like, do you want the same thing with our cancer research drugs or anything else, right? Do you want a crappier copy of what an American company is able to produce? Oh, just because it costs less money, but it's not going to have the same effect, right?
Let me walk you through something real quick. So Congress enacted a law 3 years ago that stood up the National Commission on Emerging Biotechnology Security that looks specifically at this issue. What's our leadership position in pharmaceuticals vis-a-vis China? What they basically said was, we're at risk of losing our leadership position because of what's happening on the policy level, on the capital markets level, investments, etc. China's doing basically all the right things to attract capital and innovation, and we're seeing the results. 40% of new cancer treatments coming out of China. Here's the problem, and that report that came out just in April was informed by the CIA and Department of Defense. So there's a classified portion of this report and an unclassified portion of this report. And basically, the challenge that we're seeing is that they're not making crappy products coming out of China now. These are global biopharmaceutical manufacturing companies who are saying, it's in my interest to develop this in China because China is making it easy for me to develop these products.
Yeah, that's definitely a risk.
But here's the national security angle here that's really important. We have people have heard rare earth discussions recently, maybe. Rare earths are like the minerals and the key starting ingredients that go into making a drug. And most of that comes from China. They've invested in it for 20 years, the technology to do that really cheaply. Most of the rest of the world doesn't have that technology. So while rare earth minerals are available all over the earth, they're produced really cheaply in China. We currently have 13 key starter ingredients for pharmaceuticals that are solely sourced in China, for which the U.S. military is heavily or is dependent, right? Like these are formed into drugs that the military uses for troops on the battlefield. 7 finished products we are solely dependent on China that are primarily used for our military. So you want to talk about a national security risk, a national security concern. If our troops are dependent on China, we get into a hot conflict with China,
It's not
and
going
they
to be
shut
good.
that off.
Yeah, it's
I
not
mean,
good.
I'm talking antibiotics and stuff, right? This is not a good situation. So we need to be very mindful of this, not just from an innovation standpoint, from a national security standpoint as well.
What do you think the U.S. can do to encourage that? Do you think it's more domestic production? Is it finding rare earth development in other countries and partnering with them? Like an interesting perspective on this as well is I was down in Peru doing some operations down there for an NGO, and the amount of investment that Russia and China is putting into Peru for their rare earth mineral access and their food, like large pescatarian group down there, was very interesting. You know what I mean? And I think that's definitely something we missed the boat on, was investing more in South America when it comes to these things. Rainforest access, access to rare, medications and things like that. But they're already doing it. Like, what do you think is a solution that the U.S. could do to counter these operations?
We are investing in the technology to produce the rare earths here. We've also, the president put rare earth on the table with Ukraine. So I think we're playing catch up on that one, and we will for a while. But we need to put more resources into that. I think the government needs to put more resources into that technology and developing that technology and refining the rare earths here. But we really need enterprise zones for manufacturers where we've got very friendly areas where we're encouraging research and development and production of biopharmaceutical products. I would start with the ones that were most at risk on the national security front. And what those enterprise zones would do would be to set up we need to make it favorable to hire people. We need to address permitting issues. The government makes it really hard to start a new business or set up a manufacturing plant. Environmental issues and other stuff. We need to make it very easy for companies to export those products to earn more in foreign markets, so that it becomes more valuable from them from a business perspective. There's so creating enterprise zones for domestic production of this stuff, so that we can, kind of, the catch up doesn't need to be as long as it needs to be. We can shorten the time that it takes to get us to catch up.
No, that makes sense. I think this is something that a lot of Americans aren't paying attention to, right? It's easy to say we want cheaper drugs. We want the pharmaceutical companies to suffer over this. It's not fair to the American taxpayer, but they're just brushing the surface on these objects. Like, it sounds nice when you're saying you're going to pay $40 for insulin, but what you're not really addressing is it's the insurance companies. It's illegal immigration. It's the bad policies. It's the bad sourcing of the source of our drugs from overseas. It's encouraging our adversaries and near peer adversaries in a future conflict possibly to take over production and distribution from the United States, which, like you said, will affect the U.S. military from a national security standpoint and all these other Americans. And as a result, if these companies lose so much money that they're not going to be profitable, which I don't think people understand, in order to have a business, it has to be profitable. You can't just run a business and everything's for free. If you don't encourage these businesses to maintain their profitability or their viability, then you're going to lose that. They're going to close down. You're going to outsource these things to overseas companies. You bringing these things up, it definitely gives me a different perspective on things. And I hope more Americans are paying attention to this, because while it's fun to talk about Trump or Biden on Ukraine or all these like things that these people are not even remotely involved in. Like unless you're in the US military, like this stuff doesn't affect you. You know, I mean, there's people throwing tear gas canisters down the street, you know, over they think Mexico still belongs, still owns California apparently, but they don't know history, right? But like what does affect everyday Americans is drug prices, our universal, you know, ability to access healthcare and innovative drugs. And I don't think that big pharma is the bad guy in this. If anything, yeah, do they make billions of dollars? Yeah, but we would hope they would, because if they don't, then what's going to encourage them to continue producing innovative products and providing drugs to people that need them?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think, look, the point here is not are they good guys or bad guys. I mean, they make these products that literally save people's lives. That's what they do. The point for the typical American, me included, is I want two things, right? I want my drug costs to go down, and I want a robust domestic innovation environment so my national security concerns go down as well. And if we do that, and we have good jobs and high-paying jobs and great companies and all that stuff, we're the literally the medicine chest of the world. We can do both those things. I just don't think price controls are the answer. It's nice to have a boogeyman and to beat the crap out of someone. I just don't think it's the answer. I think really relying on government to secure our future in this regard is a fool's errand. Like, why the hell would we trust the government to do anything well?
I agree. They don't do anything well. I've had to deal with these clowns for like 15 years. You probably longer than me. You know. So what do you think some like people listening to this podcast, and you got actually a bunch of viewers online right now, which is actually kind of fun. So what can Americans do now to ensure that everything we talked about is protected, innovated, like cuz you know just as well as I do. A lot of these members of Congress and the Senate have absolutely no idea what's going on. They rely on like 5 or 6 staffers wearing their skinny jeans and their Nike running shoes to brief them on the most important issue of the day. But like I said, if constituents aren't bringing these actual issues up with information and facts to back them, these bills can't get passed. So what are some changes you're looking forward to in the next legislative cycle, things you're working on now? What are things that Americans can do now to support what you've been talking about in order to further all the things we've talked about today?
Yeah, first things first, we got to pass the one big beautiful bill. Congress needs to hear from folks that this is a good solution. Like I said, there's a provision in that bill that says you can't be charged cost sharing on the marked up price of the drug. It's got to be the net cost. We got to get that done first and foremost. Secondly, we need to pass PBM reform so that you're not getting charged that full price, and that you're actually benefiting from your insurance through lower cost sharing. I think the third thing that we need to do is encourage domestic manufacturing so that we can get a better national security. And what we need to do there is multiple things, but basically new incentives for domestic production along the lines of what President Trump wants to do. And I think the fourth thing is we really need to encourage Congress to use AI to start doing the research so that we, in a way that generates innovation, yes, but that also earns a return for taxpayers.
No, I would agree. And with AI, like there has to be more electricity generation. There has to be better infrastructure in place to support those things. And I think the deal that we made in the Middle East, with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, of them bringing over the investment to actually start building these data centers, that's going to be essential to revolutionizing the medical industry as well. And it'll save so much time and development and research and things as well.
But Adam, let me top line it. I think the biggest message I'd like to leave your viewers with is and your listeners is, get the power out of Washington. Government-run healthcare is a disaster.
100% agree.
Okay, Medicaid agree. Is a disaster. Yeah. No one wants to be on Medicaid. It's a great safety net. But if you ask someone, if I lost my insurance today, where would you want to go next? They would say their employer plan. Okay.
Yeah, I would never want to switch to government healthcare. My employer plan is awesome, and I would never switch to government healthcare unless I absolutely had to. Get the power out
of Washington, man. Get it back to the private sector. Get it in the hands of the people.
And speaking on that, but What is your best argument for making sure that we can still maintain our private healthcare? Because so many Americans have this belief that they need to switch to full blown government healthcare. And I already described the disaster of the NHS in the UK, but I mean, like, from your perspective as somebody who's been involved in this for so long, how can you message that to Americans to advocate for privatized healthcare and why it's the best solution for America?
Yeah, you have better outcomes. You get access to the doctors you need to see when you need to see them. Generally, it costs less. Like taxpayers subsidize these government-run programs, but we're paying the premium on that. It's just the consumer's not paying, but it's generally lower cost to the premium payer, and you get more access to all the drugs and doctors than you do in government. 35% of all Medicaid patients who are looking for primary care end up in the emergency room. You know why? Because they can't find a doctor to treat them. How the hell is that a good program? Like, it's the most expensive setting for an ear infection or something. Their kid's got a cold. They got to wait 12 hours to see a doctor in the hospital and pay the highest price. That is not a good solution. We need to get better access, lower costs, higher quality, better outcomes for our patients. The private sector delivers that. It's just we've got only 52% of Americans in private coverage. The government is literally at a tipping point of taking over our healthcare system. We need to reverse the stream here and get more people out of government programs and into the private sector. We do that by economic growth, flourishing. People are more successful. They're working for private companies. They're getting that private coverage.
No, I completely agree, Joel. This has been an eye-opening conversation for me, and I hope a lot of Americans listen to this because I think it really breaks down, everything we've seen from 30-second sound bites or minute and 30 seconds from this congressman or this senator speaks on C-SPAN or whatever. But you've been able to break it down in a way that makes sense, and I hope that people really listen to this. They take action. They actually get involved in Congress. They contact their representatives, and they actually understand the roots of how our healthcare system and our innovative pharmaceutical industries work here in the U.S. and supporting those industries moving forward. I think that's really important to understand.
No, thank you, Adam.
Well, thanks for coming on the show today, Joel, and hang out for a minute after I close out. But you guys can catch this episode. It's going to replay on Monday. It's going to be available on all the platforms. And for all the guys who watch this live, you actually have the largest live viewing ever on this show. So people are actually really interested in what you had to say. So we're going to have discussions in the future. And if you want to come on and talk about legislation and stuff in the future, please let me know because that's what I'm going to be doing. I go back to D.C. in July to start hammering on doors again. So
it'd be my pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show today, Joel.
Appreciate it.
Cool. That was great.